to your paper and pretend to flow. And then you start speaking.
Who's keeping time?
Now that
You have a timekeeper. I don't trust him. Look,
Jeremy is keeping time. You have a timer on your computer?
that's not good. You don't want
All right. Now we got everything we need.
we're already done. Beer?
Yeah.
I don't need beer.
No.
Here we go.
Begin.
Advantage 1 axis is calculation without US no for shoes, which condition for most likely regarding World War III for shoes based on hard back press risk axis, Tom 2009 no for shoes, extension over lots of nuclear war 2 days, people get hotter, hotter, axle track, American Council, Oswald, so we some technological creams, positive attack for Soviet officials, and yes, we have a big difference for no for shoes, the words for reduce response to the shoes, no for Soviet use today, might have a common impact for us, or peace, educating effect, no impact even makes sense in the context of actual nuclear change, very short lead time, time, pressing, child, decision makers, Rose 1 9, preliminary system, company by confusion, characterized, possible friends, changing credibility, false positive warning signals, time, pressure, make decisions, key problem, and there is a resumption of a military planners, low threshold construction, and the limits of this short-term planning, saying agreed. No, interior officers advise converted for war, and all forms of lead force necessary when to use large and as many as possible. Understand force more likely to population on planning, for lose focus on the day's war and protect. New military call for escalation, and the outside escalation, miscalculation, resulting extinction, rest of nuclear bombers resist an all-time high. Rosenwald 2007 nuclear doomsday machine was system automatically detonated, and transfers effective on taking an extra one, set off the launch, releasing about deadly earth in the habitable. Would not be of any similar technique doomsday machine, there's evidence for us that deactivate system must proceed, and warning attack 50 minutes, decide whether they're valid. Using or losing pressure would make the wrong decision, more likely press makes accidentally forward, possibility being given some Russian nuclear hostage and demonstrating build a doomsday machine, the utilities, the relief, dead hands, communication networks, mind disturbance, semi-automatic retaliation, decapiting strike, miscal is most likely the spark for nuclear use between US and Russia, 2007. User is not to deliver nuclear war, external war, cosmic war, arsenals, irrationalities, nuclear war, command control, members, soldiers, crowd names, escape, external war, left, right, policy. U.S. Russian nuclear conflict results in extinction by scientific studies through Star 9, using modern massive climate models and supercomputers, modern large nuclear models, make 150 million tons of smoke, completely block sunlight from reaching trying to work with hemispheres, like nuclear wars, produce cooling through the cold periods of ice age. Even if the risk is low, you should come first in your risk calculus goes above 9. Well, odds are low, the cost of capacity would automatically higher from warning procedure with US and Russian arsenal, vote flags, and long price launch, second advantage cooperation. U.S. Russian nuclear cooperation is handicapped by the threat of first strike, and if you pledge with the shore cooperation, WMD nuclear system level 1. Other nations will evaluate capabilities and how to respond. Not surprising, Russia's held practice of arms with cooperation, not emerging WMD hostage, we see with almost not even enough threats to begin. 3. Assessing zone nuclear reactor force structure, no pursuers, and 3% cooperation with regards to WMD. Nuclear cooperation is key to ensure reactor safety. This is A and G. In 2016, cooperation between the U.S. and Russia made dividends, benefit from the incursion transfer stream on Russian nuclear energy firms with Russia's safety, non-proliferation, and data efforts, cooperation to promote more open and transparent nuclear energy, unsafe nuclear material, Russian goals, cause global nuclear wars, peace and deaths, and external political Russia, retaliate with nuclear arbitrary full-scale nuclear conflict, leak of non-nuclear knowledge. Russia would areas with increased risk of nuclear attacks, and also to regional conflict, strong escalating reactors, meltdown on the planet. Washington 2. Radioactivity within reactors, the hottest anywhere on the planet. Safety system could be wiped out, striking water, last into the atmosphere that comes waves and diseases. The reactor bombs could have lived in the very core of our life in future generations. Last advantage is Russian first strike doctrine. Russia's in the process of setting its military doctrine for the next 20 years. The draft submitted the amendment about any year reverse no first uses. Renovasi 10-9. Russia's new doctrine will contain changes in situations triggered the use of nuclear weapons for preventive strikes. Russia will soon adopt a new military doctrine. In respect to preventive strikes, will formulate provisions that will be different from the current doctrine. New draft doctrine is faced until 2030. Still being developed and given to the amendment for consideration before the end of 2009. 4. Scenarios for conflict. First is the Caucasus change in nuclear doctrine makes Russian expansion into the nuclear conflict in Georgia Neville. Last war proves this is both in 2010-14. The nuclear world doctrine first strikes against aggressive and religious nuclear weapons used against a nuclear attack, but also in regional wars. Russia will limit nuclear preemptive strikes against aggressive contains new military doctrine based on its military planning. New Russian make accusation Georgia supporting now cases just remember the war's not over. Judge members willing to executive forces that's any representation of Georgia, UK, and the whole. Your boxes might be targeted Russian first strike cause extinction, coal cats, 1021. Russia, who belongs to be feared in this respect, criminal test stockpiles, not members, definitely have to leave Russia's leader reckless. Actually, during nuclear warfare, the nuclear strike could be dangerous to the entire community, even without a first strike. Russian expansion of the Soviet bloc is most likely scenario for extinction. 8 warns. Like in 99 regional structures with little encourage optimism, the Caspian Davids and movements about committing force from alliance creates British war and more protracted conflicts with the Russian Russian termination next U.S. U.S. has energy encourage out from Moscow, contest U.S. business and President Moscow, leading threat in the Third World War II elections, retracting rescue from defeat. Russia, Armenian treaty could justify fighting in Nagorno-Karabakh. The structural condition of war and ethnic conflict parties and homes described as unintended escalation. Russian leaders threatened nuclear war in such cases against Turkey's NATO ally nuclear go. Could trigger the danger of war here higher here than anywhere else. And second is U.S. China. China border incursions are inevitable. Tech advances in China's demographic imbalance, mutual deaths across borders, demographic imbalance, get into hot relation, Chinese encroachment. Russia moving westward creates conditions Chinese and middle Russian territorial periphery. The growing demographic imbalance creates a source of rising fear and nationalism. Russia cannot dismiss this prospect of more powerful service technology disseminated to China. only muscle of one sort of leg in. Russian first use means these skirmishes will go nuclear, one worse conventional. To be Clark and 10-15, Russia will reverse adopt your develop part of nuclear strikes. The kitchens have been reversed. You about the use of conventional, on mass scale, regional, local, current nuclear strikes now ruled out. They will stop over conventional nuclear, using nuclear weapons. China, the force will be so such thing as regional nuclear war. China, the message clear. Any border incursion risk all. And that caused extinction. Charter 2001. Russian confronting Chinese army with World War II. Massive trucks and military force. China will be the only way out. Absolutely unprotected nuclear warning. The third scenario is Chechnya. Even if they win the theoretical risk of conflict with Russia low, you should prefer magnitude. Independently for strike policy destroys international aid to Chechnya. Stratford 2000. Doctor minds me Russia's the only nation with sufficient weapons to conduct annihilating attack with a how much of a strike is a huge difference in a negligible that non-existent particularly. Orders of magnitude involved. Russians are unlikely to use the term like this is not even possible. They're possibly the coast will be triggered in the response. Change calculus Western intervention. The war in Chechnya will be affected. Any aid distraction threatened to retreat, set low territory retaliation, use policy willing instructions, tactically weapons to try to fly on China cannot be discounted once the weapons occupation very different harm. The nuclear threats in war condition forces fail not to conceal Russian treachery. They will see their border frontier will use tactful nuclear weapons. International aid to Chechnya is vital to building up infrastructure and long-term weapons. The only way to limit the threat of terrorism. Hill in 5. This approach involved Western aid, including transportation, infrastructure, housing, electricity, educational, and business. Help will limit the threat of Islamic extremism and terrorism, and also develop trust between Russia and the West, given greater influence in Moscow over Chechnya. Crisis threatens to spill over across terrorism instability. States in 2005, the Western approach to Chechen conflict will around its interest, considering Chechnya is helping feed the international jihadi movement. The conflict is gaining an international dimension. This is especially true now. The killings are increasing and threatening to destabilize the entire region. Colson 9 in Chechnya, string of killings threatening to destabilize Russia, costing reason the killings will in the role of Chechnya, who pushed Moscow's 10-year lockdown. There has been a surge in deadly attacks in the straws and great powers, causing sanctions on Moscow 98. The caucus of rival platforms could unite nations drawing powers for nuclear threat is greater than the Cold War. China ran your areas are less predictable and more dangerous, and terrorism caused U.S. lash out precipitating global war. Toward 2001, terrorist attacks and reactivated defense mechanisms drive nationalist sentiment because many of his names the situation emotionally volatile and other attack on top of economic recession could radicalize the United States in search of war. Claiming this is indiscriminately towards pavement to the unseen enemy. The fourth scenario is the Ukraine. Russian threat to first strike to stabilize Ukraine, uniquely likely before the election. A hardened 10-11 zone of influence haunt Europe. Russia's made clear it sees Ukraine as crucial zone of influence. Will be a war between Russia and Ukraine in August. Amendment gave Yushchenko an unprecedented diplomatic mugging. He told him as far as Russia was concerned, Yushchenko was a non-person. The flashpoint is Crimea. We are seeing the resurrection of integrationist ideology. A lot of people in this part of the world are seriously shitting themselves. Before the election on 17 January, there's possibility minor clash could ignite deadly conflict. Accident of Liver this month, Russian deputies adopted first treaty military doctrine, criminal and non-rule out using forceful means. Ukraine's stability is keystone European peace is guarded in 1997. Ukraine plays a much larger role in security Europe and committed to analysis of Ukraine now cornerstone part of Europe failure. Could be the class of future Europe as a whole. European war goes nuclear. Blazer 93. The ending of the Cold War has not eliminated the possibility of major power war. European war could threaten U.S. security. The U.S. could be drawn to such a war could escalate to the war that could attack against the American homeland will preempt your Ukraine backfile. The influence of the card that post-siege scenario 2 Ukraine is on the brink. If failed state has made real democratic change, the Orange Revolution just pushed them closer to the edge as the bell. Tell 23 the war to go back to the Orange Revolution, part of the touch Western support of democratic exercise, the offensive support of democracy, the revolution, to reduce the stable democracy across this economy, nothing has changed. Ukraine is moving the category of failed state. Independent conflict of Ukrainian economic and political stability is needed for Russian energy transportation pancakes in 2008. If Ukraine goes belly up to political turmoil, these serious matter for all. In building in Ukraine, application energy supply, especially gas turbines on the way to Western Europe. And energy transportation is responsible for Russian economic growth. Embargo beginning in January proves the brink. Hamburger in 11-14 natural gas embargo in Ukraine for Russian pellet for Russians on sales. 20% of Russia's entire central budget gas monopoly responsible for 9%. Russia's total GDP and export shipments made up 15% of global export revenues. Every day gas not delivered means one day top dollar revenues lost to peak seasons. Bad news for the Russian economy and Russian rubles. After Russian economic collapse caused nuclear conflict. 899 in internal war to start by Russia and intimidation of the crime causing battle. Russia and focus on trying to refugees who are on chocolate cookies and killing the neighbors. Nuclear plants poisoning the environment, integration leads loss of control of arsenal war reps, Moscow's triple attacks were taken, making weapons and lies available for right-wing anti-American groups, and nuclear deterrence fails. With Russia risk of crisis stability, nuclear war decreasing reliance on weapons is key. For 2009, rather than nuclear weapons, use should concentrate on cooperation about war strategies. Not clear the nuclear element of extended deterrence situation holds for policies, capabilities, and would deter or dissuade Russia scenarios in which Russia might bully are not likely to include credible threats using spectre nuclear war, undermine the credibility of extended deterrence because allied states would become alarmed in ways that would weaken or resolve the pushback against Russian pressure. Many European states have always been available on getting caught in nuclear conflict between US and Russia, bringing this ambivalence to the foreground and weaken alliance solidarity who are to avoid focusing on the Russian salience. The plan is the only way to solve, and FU creates pressure on Russia to adopt a similar policy to satisfy security concerns when we solve the start. Act in 929, how would Russia have no issues? No issues can be used with Russia and other members adopting to also Russia start negotiations with war against no issues. Putting Russia on Russia had no issues and reverse the reason they reverse it because NATO model which rely on their nuclear forces to plan. The United States federal government should prohibit the use of the United States federal government's items matching the description provided in Section 8, Part H of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Index, and it's against the Russian Federation. If the Russian Federation is not using an item matching the description provided in Section 8, Part H of the Federal Emergency Management Agency's Incident Index against a nation or national agent.
What was the change of plan thing?
It's not like the undersecretary's reporting one. So,
It changes the definition, or it's an actual aid that's a change?
It's like a different word for nuclear weapons.
Yeah, it's a different word for Russia.
Yeah.
The nuclear cooperation advantage, the local evidence, I'll read a short portion from it. It is not surprising that Russia felt progress in arms control cooperation and stopped the emerging WMD threats hostage. The underlying portion to obtain America's commitment on the continued prohibition of national missile defense is codified by the ABM Treaty. Any evidence that indicates that cooperation will have invoked that? I've marked it with blue lines.
Yeah, no, our evidence goes on to say right after that, to achieve goals in stopping WMD threats, we have to revive our own doctrine and force structure. The missile defense concession was a good first step.
You might win the NFU as a first step for all of those things, but any evidence that indicates that that's technically
after your little part that you read, it says, yet these doctrines continue to require nuclear forces and war plans that give U.S. a first strike capability. And our evidence is quite clearly in the context of first strike trading.
Yeah, that's 3 lines later. It talks about the Cold War paradigm carrying over to the ABM Treaty. Any evidence that indicates that we get concessions post an NFU on the issues of the ABM Treaty?
On the ABM.
That's literally the line, right? We'll move on. The Rosenbaum evidence indicates that the impact defense doesn't make sense because there is a short amount of time. I feel like reading the entirety of this because I'm not really sure it makes an entire argument, but it indicates that there's a short amount of time between the conflicts themselves.
There's short lead time. Decisions have to be made in crisis scenarios.
Right, it indicates that because the conflicts are close, right? But why would military planners who have been constructing scenarios with nuclear weapons for years already have most of these decisions already put together?
Well, that's also the argument of our Sagan evidence that military planners do have a presumption in favor of use. But the argument is just that crisis stability is different than sort of like, would we go to war with Russia? We can't answer that question the same way in the status quo as we could in a crisis because there's short lead times. So there's a very intense pressure to take a fast decision.
Generals plan incrementally, they look for things like that.
No, that's the opposite of our argument. They plan for short-term war aims.
Yes, focus on today's war.
Yeah.
Right? It doesn't really put it in the context of, I guess, your argument, but it says
I think that's
they respect the nuclear weapons. Never mind. Miscalc, most likely scenario. This evidence indicates that we missed past opportunities and we might have just been lucky. I'm curious why this makes it the most probable scenario.
Well, the evidence also goes on to say, given the orders of magnitudes involved, we should not treat a negligible risk the same thing as like
so it's
no
a magnitude claim. I'm questioning the probability statement.
Yeah, that is a piece of evidence that says while the probability might be low, the orders of magnitude.
About the miscalc versus intentional.
Okay, yeah, no, the miscalc versus intention argument is just that no rational leader would choose to use nuclear weapons, but that miscalculation and crisis instability create different circumstances that make that more high. Again, this all begs the question of our Sagan evidence, which we were talking about earlier.
The Sagan evidence indicates that that's how military planners.
Look, we think the collection of those three pieces.
NFU keyboard, like our constant evidence is that it massively increases the risk of miscalculation. It begs the question of the indirect.
Ready? Yep. 6 off. And then cooperation, accidents and miscalc, and no first use in Russia. So cooperation, accidents, Russia. Yes, sir. And the Russia scenarios in order are not divided?
Relatively. We'll tell you.
Relatively in order.
They are in order of the way they. It's just there are a couple arguments. Cooperation. Okay. Is everybody good to go? First off, topic county mission states point interpretation. There are 15 distinct missions. The Oregon article, the FF to eliminate one of them. Oregon 5. The violation is that substance missions are not missions. They gain to target Roger. 95 missions is just operation task before we will take the scenario belt straight. Part of the operations there can be subdivided into measurable mission tasks or functional objectives. For example, the RLT mission of traveling north towards consistent stellar mission tasks is the standards. First limits they explode the top by line. Every mission be broken down into dozen categories of waste and instance where it's complaint with predictability. Additionally, their interpretation is a fair adaptable version. In the case of just general IQ pledges that if they went into mission, can be broken into other teams should establish views is feasible. Additionally, topic values of our futures to out of activity should be judged on the basis of the interpretations. Next off, says 300. The United States federal government should offer to perform all parts of the plan. Russia agrees against all sales of S-300 missiles to Iran. First, it must be changed to people prosperity kind of deal from the 9 and Graham where he does consider Russian interests to be in return for capable system against Russian hyper-issue to activity further. You as concession to the politically scales away from your central Russian handles some other areas around the initiative judgment not. That's why hey more than not our cost objectives negotiation is still being watched Africa the negotiation is solid market professional style or discussion that as well. Administration needs to line the big picture of leading the S-300 deals market Israeli airstrikes against Iran and die and 819 the letters promise to reconsider to determine what there's much of a sector and all the terms of attacking Charles Phillips, we learned to name our guys' hands on the S-300. So the U.S. Charlie believe that the weather opportunity to attack private is limited. It should after before the S-300 is a little share, strikes spark Cold War, Afghan 3. It show will launch a rating to further restrict after such able secret, but not abuse war, public competition, for the world is allowed about the thoughts of the MPs, with robberies and pledge. The world nuclear gas express with the potential brain, the world's nuclear brain. Finally, Russia says yes, Cooper 9. Sorry, that's the potential cover harmfully, rather than negotiate from sides for attack, potential trade, process, and symbol enable for non-Russian actions in exchange for Russia getting serious about the being of military Russia might conceivably accept the U.S. trials of her bargain. Next off is peace process. Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are closely watching the bombs and investments of the capital of peace process. They fear disaster. Mohammed has become a hard line from low. In 11-12, ready to invade and help the 3 years held. But situation 3 for the growing pressure of the president is only is still hefty, albeit diminishing political capital, key foreign policy initiatives, and principles of reversal U.S. regimes. Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi systems major risks around revolutionary administration, starts to disorder advisory cells and illegitimate strikes these weeks. Why? As we need to do Obama, Israel was less than warned. He's on key issues like nuclear reductions in Israel, Palestine, or 07, Malta 9. He's trying to do much for the serious engagement in a two-state solution and the plan to create nuclear arms reduction. None of these things fit in the category for conspiracy to fire. Time, effort, and investment of capital. Outrage in Egypt, Jordan, and Saudi Arabia. This place a conflict global nuclear war from the Washington Night. When these conflicts are dangerous, is they have the world eventually historically village steps to demonstration of the world that I thought the African countries fighting security about the terrorism and all the rest of the governments join the fight issues in the country will spare the overthrow the Egyptian government grenade and so the rest of the bill help us to the government of the conflict tribe as seeking to provide the show the drama making the symbol of sacrifice and conflict solved many years ago in the conflict yes, but time is running off. Next off is the laboratories. Labs are on the brink of nuclear back funding barrels sufficient to continue to recruit new scientists. Primary 24 as the people such pledging opportunities and other learning health and programs that are only sort of support all the leaders like prisoner funding were part by the weapons programs for large depression of the last streets on DSL to prevent that ecological surprises while that is behind us has helped them budgets to move upward social levels labs are a bit of finding after recruit. Scientists working to energy the science for texas and link first year use drawings and equal because of perceptions of declining program capture proof networks Adam Drell and a challenging answer to certain factors and equal ability not having graduates and many opportunities to see positions in engineering disease. Avalanche is perception that for structures declining be difficult to attract the best and brightest and fair to recruit new scientists collapses labs Charles 99 the pounds is very short alcohol to generation where it's the cancer won't have to work with measures time nuclear and nuclear extended complex and also nuclear with nuclear work complex we 100% higher on average consumer computers develop nuclear research fire and simulations to help rate help solve birth flu from embryos so in 6 phases of influence and vaccines report computer simulation population matches use and sort of research study how infectious disease spread and what strategies might lessen the impact of real outbreak 1 billion people die per year and 6 million people believe in our country 26 cities will be more than hopefully it will happen like fast and since people will 24 hours size the certainty that became the more prevalent 1 million people die in 6 months. Next off is the Congress countermeasure. The United States Congress should legislate creating a special committee of Congress with authority over the authorization of first use of weapons nuclear weapons and arms. The committee should include the Speaker, minority leader, the House of Representatives, the majority minority leader, the Senate, the Chair, and ranking member of the Senate and House Committees on Armed Services, the Senate Committee on Foreign Relations, the House Committee on International Relations, the Joint Committee on Atomic Energy. This counterplan solves it basically takes first on the table must specifically authorized by the committee from stoning each summer today to do about the president of authorities to go to the congressional involvement. 8. Six would be created a special committee of Congress with a greater 43 first use people such as contain its others so much good acts particularly using the Congress state. The such committee should get lead over first use of reports all to be used by the others of the shot. They can walk to security as the majority of the committee this is effect two substance he is in the top of the chain between the president and the secretary of state and Congress and legislative beyond presidential first use in 1787. The authority since the Constitution of the Constitution George Washington President Nelson reserves the judgment of the consequences of the cause of the argument for first use of the president so much more medicine right to control the decision they control the state by legislation Congress fellowship and our the president authorizes the board of the assembly the board from arsenal available on military compared to wars 5 overseas the first to assert the funds that he spent the use of the local legislative system for pursuing the conflict rather we discourage the state from going forward and finally the counterplan would change force structure and set the same fundamental limits on first use of Ullman in 72 and alternative to a flat you first use circulation when it comes to congressional legislation to deal with the president limit and issue these use equal without receiving private control selection kind of use of the power of the president as the threshold from individual equal to the effect to be similar to the first use of the by collective limits to the U.S. would not initiate the use of nuclear weapons next off NATO. NATO Strategic Council will not change nuclear policy for fear of opening up the paying the box really in 9. What could set up a new strategy to say on nuclear arms will have to go to the constantly keep the lines between to get consensus rather than demonstrate. Regular assurance will be at the heart of this deliberation. NATO to convert federal will be the rate of assurance by the U.S. with the central members in NATO to recollecting weapons to put orthodox that can undermine the notion of common transit security teams. Certain reality will stake there a certain reflex such as one of the NATO reassurance standard just likely to show. The global security next is linked to play would undermine NATO security guarantees and crush NATO US 99 US adopted the international lines. The contrary to policy debate brings up consistent with the established policy assumptions NATO members to see and if you offering everything like this understand if you could undermine the alliance to increase the risk of nuclear relation finally unified NATO's key to deal with political violence and nuclear war Brzezinski and 9 NATO's power Russia and US military through Europe Brazil split Europe swap political government way that makes the NATO global security and the rest of the world is experiencing the rest of the menace by accessibility to the chain and the global war relationship will further it will intensify strategic concerns you now cooperation. No impact of the last play Paris off the end 717 uses desire to reset relations with the show the improvement of otherwise change relationship. The well suspicion that was marked by a landmark previous and support for speaking Americans and herald of the understanding. Start there was a hot who followed the MBT Obama not allowed the review and the US with the showcase. Start there internally is about BMT with the BMT which is able to solve some process additionally. Member of the public plan and fires hardliners to block cooperation stop 917 aside. Believe the opening parts to the shield might be also known to the response of the block response largely citizen and large machine hard power. To force it to have to reach the civil doctors inside after and also video considered by Ukraine to backside. The period of consent for to class body the chances of Russian military intervention at 50-50. Additionally, they can't solve any of these terms because Harney's Agency 914 member has said the belongs must be abandoned and said the state practice must eliminate their solution national comes to the country's Russian aggression, Western prison, and the best and cultural common standards in such issues. Now, axioms. Obviously, no empirical precedent. Obviously, would have been much worse during the Cold War when they were targeted at each other to just leave in the ocean. Now, Sullivan and nuclear arms with launch of an active real target hit the addition fact that the missile launch data already be on site at the first. Multiple attacking structures should be the fifth war system. Not reducing possibility of accident. Proceeds to deliver attack. There's no Russian launch on warning system now. Popular conspiracy Russian launch systems. The defense series found friction. No chance this system will ever recover to use. Any launch on warning systems is constantly using capabilities to survive some time. The Russian military. The bottom word of the stack accidents are incredibly unlikely, for especially from weapons locked in today's cycle of multiple safeguards. All which will be satisfied with the Lord's army when they useful people over the nations losing 320 bombs, one on the ground was killed. They also don't solve any of this advantage because we would still maintain the weapons for things like first use to China. Additionally, nuclear accidents would escalate. All tonight, Dr. Cole was not found its way. Taking report of many accidents take place. Methodology was causing anybody to blow anybody else. Just a simple fact. Tells us we were 25 away from over. Additionally, finally, they can't solve accidents because Russian officers would just bypass it. Boeing 98. There exists here the chain of command bypass Russian officers have been known to rewire the system. Certain instances have some ability to launch autonomously. Also been reported that sometimes only when Russia remains under its two keys and the gun is disposable. Now, NFU. Top level arguments. Russia would adopt NFU to reduce reliance on conventional war and undermine international power by wrong in 19 equal states, but relatively with conventional power and adopt NFU policy to protect the additional conventional war stuff and policy makes it accepting through security risks. Actually, we don't like to persist to also look to start president still touch make the country with vulnerable actions from both sides. Rejected adopting NFU policy based upon the overreaction. Now they wouldn't adopt it because it would be perceived as credible by the West, even if it's sincere paying wrong. In the Soviets, when we not take serious by the Russians, policy was not to revoke. Formally in 1995, Western world was not as economically generous as Russians expect, nor did they count Russia's geopolitical evil anymore. Now they say they have the most recent evidence is from 12/23/08. Russia and Ukraine just reached a gas agreement, caused off any disputes. In the Caucasus, Moscow, times 11:23 today. Putin has agreed to an important extension of the gas agreement with Ukraine. Heading off the disputes that could just our chances of Europe at this point of the agreement with Moscow and Kiev. There's one of the potential hurdles for the safety of European specifiers. There's no denying the potential for new gas products in the countries hanging heavier with some of which ended with news of compromise. Here to prevent just that equilibrium in Eastern Europe. Now Russia's back off and looking to stabilize. Economists will to nuclear in Europe, Russian American neighbors, States of America, if what Russia wants in Congress, an inclusive Euro-American system, right? Against Russian policy, they wouldn't be able to detonate a weapon. Camp 96 with terrorist organization with nuclear weapons, different types of like a massively detonate a weapon, most nuclear weapons, would be highly stable to equal terror to the response to difficulty different nuclear weapons, have self-defense to be overridden by small and specially trained technicians, centralized war to escalate wipes and six, which is about a great game, or segregation concepts for influence regions, by time with national interest, trying to crush the rest of the three, have some sense of people, guys, and sharing the military things, but also have some deep especially in reducing terrorism and drug trafficking. Additionally, there's no impact to a European war from Sherman Ministry. They all think war between the past year. Coming why we're going to flood addition to raging things of diverting great prince and past commonality and economic integration and creative support as well as would form the foundation of the youth.
Ready?
Yes, sir.
What's the status of the counterclaim?
Very condition.
Okay, so that means we can't succeed with it?
That's correct.
Okay, your first condition counterclaim, your Cooper evidence is about start reductions and says that nuclear cuts are the key incentive. Where's your NFU equal leverage card?
If you're really willing to say that Russia wouldn't be willing to do something similar for getting rid of the ability to strike them first,
yeah,
I think that that's a
in
somewhat
the
absurd
context
claim.
of start reductions. I don't understand why that applies to the
It is, and it also speaks to the perception that that sends to Russia about our nuclear intentions. Obviously, START is about numbers. Yes, it's obviously about that, but the ongoing negotiations that our Cooper evidence talks about are about creating a dialogue where we have a discussion on different nuclear issues.
I guess on
Which
politics.
Russian NFU would obviously be a very
Okay, on the Congress counterclaim, does your counterclaim still allow the president to make threats?
What's up?
Is the president still allowed to make threats of nuclear first use?
To authorize those threats,
Yeah,
he would.
To actually use it, certainly the counterclaim requires it, but he can still make public threats, right?
Under the guise that everyone else would know, the counterclaim is announced, they would know that he would have to get authority and congressional approval, just like the convention.
The
So
counterclaim
he-
still
yeah,
retains the
they know
option
he'd
of
have to-
first use against Russia too, right? Congress just has to approve it?
Yes.
Okay.
What's the benefit to it?
Baker?
It's the NATO disadvantage and just the NATO.
Why is the NATO disad and that benefit?
We don't renounce NFU as a policy.
Okay.
They allow us to obviously talk to Congress, they can wheel and deal.
Okay, sounds good. What? On the politics, it said your link evidence, I think, is about the status quo. You might think different, so maybe we can explain this. But it says that Obama is not managing the tension between the peace process and non-proliferation.
In January, it said he announced way too big an agenda. It does list other things on the card, I agree. But it does say that those things are zero-sum with one another and have to be sequenced next to each other.
Okay, sweet. But where's the NFU link? Again, why would things like CTBT and STAR, which are obviously part of the non-proliferation agenda, obviously being pushed by Obama now, trigger the link to all of this?
Because, well, two things. Number one is it's about action on those things. You just said,
STAR
you just talk, I mean, games.
STAR is
It's
like
about
pass in December, and why doesn't that trigger your
Sure. Well, for example, our evidence says that in meetings that are in this coming week with Netanyahu, he needs to demonstrate strong resolve on the question of settlements.
But he
And
keeps
that's being
going
watched
to
this week.
Russia,
Yes, it's
meeting
going to be a
with
long
Medvedev,
process for the
like,
peace
doing
process. It's supposed to be
summits.
done in December, but yeah.
Okay, if the peace process is a long process, why does the one-time announcement of the plan require
Because
sustained
recently,
leadership?
the Israelis have threatened to build 900 new homes in Kilo.
Yeah,
Our evidence says
that
it's
doesn't answer my
only
question. If the peace process is a long,
Yes, it
long
does.
thing, why
Because
one shot?
the settlements issue is closely connected to Jordan, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia's perception of
Why is-
security, which are Nawash evidence says will escalate the conflict to global nuclear war.
Okay,
It's
you're
not
right.
peace process writ large, it's settlements. Settlements this month.
Okay, settlements this month now, key.
Yes.
The labs dissent, you haven't introduced a piece of evidence from after 2008. Obama has like massively cut funding, the CTBT.
I guess I
sort of
don't
thing
think
that
that's
was
true.
referenced.
Embryoso?
I think it's from May 26th.
No, yeah, those are the link. That's the link. Where's
I guess
You're right, the link evidence is definitely from 2008.
Okay, I'm just wondering why, where's the NFU link again?
What's that?
Where's the NFU link?
It doesn't specifically mention.
Okay. Oh, no, just kidding. Okay, I'm good.
You have like 9:30.
Yeah, 9:26, yeah. All right.
Recording everything you're saying. It's just great.
You only have benefits if you can cover those in the Okay. Russian first use, cooperation, nuclear cooperation, mishelp, T, the Congress content,
All right, hang on. When you said Russia first, you mean all of Russia, right?
Yeah.
yeah,
So what was first? Was that first or co-op?
yeah, that's first.
Then co-op?
Then cooperation,
Yep.
then mishelp,
Yep,
then T,
yep,
then QPQ,
yep,
then Congress,
yep.
then NATO,
Yep,
then the labs to said,
yep,
or sorry, then peace process and then labs.
yep.
Give me that water, please,
You said, what was on the bottom?
labs was last.
Labs.
Ready? At the time when Russia first used it, action changes status quo makes Russia-China war and extinction inevitable. No answer to this. Relative defense means you should prefer a group. No, first use arguments are evidence. The purpose causal act and evidence says that it would cause them to rethink the policy changes. This is post-states or evidence also proves that they are only changing the doctrine, which is vital to the question. That's an argument about the evidence. More evidence outcome in 2007. The Russian leaders also very attentively U.S. News developments will suddenly be locked down. The role of nuclear weapons in the United States seem to be gradually elevated in their role. The United States can play a return role in Russia and implementing nuclear weapons. Nevertheless, the nuclear fashion seems contagious, and only the current posture change is relevant. This is Podvik in 1014. Although there may be more than reiteration in the current first use, maybe not the final text of the document may be more capable of making the distinction, but whatever the document actually states clearly, the idea of using nuclear weapons as an instrument of politics is very dear to the Russian leadership. The fact that you're taking out of consideration nuclear action from local wars is equal in settling. You say no gas, and no, you say gas, Korea won't go for that impact. You say steel wise in Europe, and that's going on. These troops, that's going on. World, the plan, world where Russia has declared they will first use nuclear weapons in a conventional crisis. Your argument about terrorists don't apply. They will detonate conventional weapons will cause the U.S. lash out, cause the Schwartz evidence. No responsive argument this, and also doesn't assume Chechnya or the collapse of Ukraine status quo. You've also conceded Central Asia. Your argument about Central Asia war only to the status quo now where Chechnya collapses now is a critical time of the size and close evidence. You say no impact to Europe. This is also only descriptive of the status quo now. Your world where Ukraine absolutely meltdowns are hard evidence that causes Russian first strikes. Independent of all of this, you can see the argument that Russian first strikes cause extinction. That is the cold hard evidence of the cooperation advantage. You say no impact to escalation or Western evidence says we don't need to win escalation or to win that it causes extinction level impacts. You say internally to BMD the plan is able to overcome them. That's the Liddell evidence. You read your nationalism arguments and Martin evidence is better since the Russia, US, and a few steps nationalism or political victory. Here's more evidence for Russia. And it doesn't end. There's no rebuttable populist nationalism. The concept of Russia's present policies of looming presence nationalism in Russia. The discourse again hand in hand become stands for the United States. The interest of Russia be brought to driving force of the country's policies. Also all the arguments that all the reverse causal evidence and the solvency evidence proves that we solve these arguments independent of this argument. Now the miscalculation argument, you consider the dead hand internally, the Russian dead hand causes extinction, which means that any sort of launch would cause extinction. And that's Rosenbaum evidence. You say cold war disproves our evidence says that this isn't true, even though it was empirically not an issue. You should still evaluate that's Rosenbaum evidence. You say ocean, the dead hand evidence answers this argument. You say no Russian launch of war. This doesn't answer our dead hand argument. Also is disproven by the Thompson and Sagan evidence that independent this isn't true. They all pre-delegate in crisis. You say no absence because the safeguards are evidence is both states. Your evidence is more specific to Russia and the United States. It's a reason why the first use massively increases it. That's also the Thompson evidence. You say don't solve no first use to China doesn't matter. Our Thompson evidence is the first use to Russia is the vital internal link. You say accidents will escalate our star evidence. Our Rosenbaum evidence is all better. And the internal link question. You say officers will bypass no matter what our evidence is. Verse causal said that the plan massively reduces the risk of war, which is the reason why I should vote affirmative now. Topicality, counter-interpretation, contextual literature proves the absence of philosophical wording. They were told to nuclear mission attacks against Russian central system plans like that. If you restrict foreign world missions with respond to launching nuclear weapons on enemy, and if you restrict saying contextual alienation standards, best to meet the political plan appears in topic appearance. Use the next example. We see questions to be in rule of experts and reasonable literature and FROM 2008. The nuclear policy of non-federal articulated additionally laid out and uncertainties about the roles, missions, of nuclear weapons, the reasonability for competing interpretation of nuclear activity program. Topic 31st, and you should default to reasonability. Their interpretations are conclusionation. We should follow that. And restrict means to cut back. We're in 2009 for jail cut back, and it isn't independently delineating only after Russia or China we have to be safe or including the explicit list of missions out of Russia. QBQ counterplan 1 is permanently counterplan 7 is nothing under direction competition. Legitimate 7 which means the act is suspended for any reason. Jack top education, artificial listening, hours relative to the code with device voter, regardless of permutation and permanent ask for the code to the plan of Biden QBQs destroyed use credibility. Carol Twins and 9. Does that mean the countries should hold veto over U.S. policy law and the other countries do veto power to make a mockery foreign policy and the credibility of legislation? And that causes the nuclear exchange calls on 95 years leadership down through the other God has to enabling the world divided over global power and all the temptations including global nuclear exchange and make the opportunity to plan of whatever data and condition as voter argument development strategy the run countries can carry and it's logic is not really issue before which we can advance any logical argument of conditional government cells like our offense and your argument is wrong because of ownership. How can 2002 break pairs given the constitutional linkage initially which is not development agreements that have little ownership agreements that have investment in research may not be conclusive because the performance arranged the more force the performance is local stakeholder positive incentives are needed not sticks and Russia is slow. This is these 19 things. Bush the nuclear stockpiles now will criticize it was in the Cold War how the United States achieved production to right and international arms control and not inclusion likely and pursuing negotiations with Russia. Instead Bush announced his decision and QPQs they also know is the Russia is willing to adjust the foreign policy. Russia lacks sufficient leverage to control Russian acquiescence policy. The U.S. can negotiate good proposals never guarantee the other side will accept any U.S. offer. And Russia has already said they give up S-31 since May or 926. On what remains clear, Russia's offers both on the delivery of S-300s despite the assurance delivery non-daylight, the breeding into intense regulation, the possibility of transition is too believable. The rate of corruption of Russia is required to really last. The less sufficient hardware and strikes our number, which is chapter 1111 is a risk period of all advance program at the end of the year. Our rate before refuses to comply with it becomes liability given the Israeli logic when sensitive action must be taken by at the end of the year. This look at many of the impacts that they have introduced in this round. Now the Congress is affirming about the counterplan with probability cover for the plan makes it seem like the outcome of the counterplan and only executive rejection solves this Miller and he says Congress to retrieve his power over nuclear weapons. His checks executive maybe new list which goes beyond the first person who uses them, and those who allegedly prescription, and sometimes can actually they will use them, and they will not use the presidential prerogative does not do under congressional votes, and also in the Congress could do that, so they have to make the difference and status quo something is required, and the congressional committee can't check this in Miller and E6 who joined the executive branch would be able to create a go-to committee to coordinate policy neither sufficient, something more is required. There is an environment of development. The president is far more messy, his primacy acts accordingly. Everyone around him from Greece so far acts later concerning acts accordingly. Janice says that it is the study group thing, and it would be rolled back. This is still need for the Supreme Court and the wartime congressional authority of the executive have been justified in congressional appearance. The delegation authority of the president include the Congress with no limitation. Also, the president is key. This is no one in 2008 Clinton's White House bureaucracy working against fundamental change of Iraq shells. Will mounting devastating the defense against the president differs only. The president can hope to circumvent the bureaucratic resistance for decades. The Strategy is ready to find the operation criteria of nuclear force in the economy between the planning and president. So it's a distinction between operational doctrine and declaratory doctrine. Now the NATO can now
It doesn't solve Russia, no percent.
also it doesn't solve Russia, no specific argument about why Russia would be a switch. Now the NATO advantage, no, and if you create a promotes unity, this is brought up 2008 retired strategist. They say they required the first use of nuclear, saying that first use of nuclear weapons must remain in the covers, revive the alliance. How could a renewed emphasis on the preemptive use of nuclear weapons possibly promote NATO unity? NATO should sure use a tilt energy, so prove sure Russia even emphasis on nuclear weapons can prejudice and no offense. NATO's already reducing reliance on nuclear weapons. NATO prize doesn't start reduce the deployment of strategic weapons on for exports to the air convinced and helping enhancing international security and the impact is never helped in 2009 issues relevant to relations over the next few years. The global economic crisis, even the global climate and disaster, and global politics on the part of the Atlantic and tech, the economic Stevens 2008 trends are not all positive. Most are worrying the continuing gravity resources defense between the axis and the as a capability of the friends, the unbridging without investment, the insufficient resources, no meaningful collaboration, the average profit provided, transatlantic defensive industrial bases would be lost, and without changes to U.S. nuclear doctrine, the first use of nuclear weapons would undermine NATO's role in managing conflicts as agreement medicine 1999. The first use of NATO would be contrary to political rational viability, which are governed the out of area intervention read. Measures the world NATO can manage a crisis protecting the rest of our political which is out of area operations be accompanied by the use of nuclear weapons. Peace process.
And the one I see the turns
Oh, and the one EC returns evidence proves that they don't solve it. Peace process. Congress is in the logjam, huge fights are coming now, halting the 1121, even the populars have to versus the time-consuming thing when the Senate hopes to vote this on the healthcare and related issues will be resolved at the end of the year, caring about legislative train wreck, national debt sins, and directing civil stuff and spending bills at patriotic highway construction and unemployment programs to top it off. Obama's decision to Afghanistan, the peace process is doomed. Hovland in 1122, Obama's initiatives in Abbas went to hell with the lowering of chains of Israel and Palestinian peace plan A was made by Obama's state rebel side to Arabs upset about the party's process, the failure to move and deliver in the settlement of reason precondition negotiations as well as the new conflict with rivals, heirs, whatever the goal to reform merits and would be review the consequences will bring it to the peace process, the mixed betrayals, the failures of God, riders, whose occupation is help both of them, the produces cynicism on both sides of confounded and outsiders cannot resolve the conflict, and the plan is intrinsic. You can do the plan and negotiate the peace process, and the plan is a win. Brief in 969, there is a broad and wide support, even on conservative politics for reducing world nuclear weapons, U.S. Russian national security policies. The moment appears right for renewal of arms control of Russia, and like this Wall Street 11-2, Obama has been signing the slew of major initiatives together, death many involved by the Republicans, the legislative majorities. Republicans are being often the administration is listening to many things, and rapidly it's hard to concentrate on all of them. And no Middle East war. This is kind of 2007. The majority in Syria are unlikely to go to war. The Middle East leaders are handling one thing, South Pacific Committee forces and handling risk of proposition to conflict more badly with the domestic political stability. Most area armies are geared toward the regime protection rather than protecting the power and political capability of sending forces. Now the lab to say. Also, political capitalism, key. They have no evidence that the plan would uniquely spill over. Now the lab to start with hot top not heritage in 1118 Obama's prior try started Obama to ratify. Started before December 5th. Many believe the United States will grant nuclear concessions. Also. Labs are to decline national defense because the private sector has been increasingly taking over the research and previous and the Department of Defense lab to new approaches, slower, less effective, costly. The government has been destroyed by bypass the private sector, Congress, and Council legislating to ban the workforce. But although these actions may be necessary, they are not sufficient, and they have no link to the Russia component of the affirmative, which means that is not big enough risk. Your impact is overblown. MSN in 2008 fears of political epidemic from blue flu were overblown. The head of the World Organization and said that H1N1 was stable despite concerns that can mutate in forms of spreading. So we have never seen stable strain concerns when H1N1 may be imminent intent to the proof of design. And typically proven and shrinking funding now. Albuquerque Journal in 2009. The concern of Los Alamos management shrinking out on the last core scientific studies can supercomputers are one of the Los Alamos seeing decline this year in supercomputer capabilities. This budget cuts in non-proliferation environment in 2009. Lawmakers requested to pay limited funding for non-proliferation. Obama's budget requests a 7% decline in Los Alamos.
Take a little prep.
Okay, there's a real long back and forth from the cross-text of the 1 and C with every just had about whether our link evidence says no first use. The piece of link turn evidence you read says that the moment appears ripe for renewal of arms control with Russia. How does the plan achieve that?
Because the
Because
plan
the same standards
offers
apply to links and link turns, right?
the plan offers a non-proliferation agreement with Russia, functionally.
Right, so
We
it's
also
not
read a
all
piece
that
of
different
evidence
from the
in
link.
the OAC that spills over to broader non-proliferation cooperation, which means our link turn can be generic, but your link cannot. Because we read spillover evidence between the plan and that. And you
Right, so your plan leads to that. We read evidence and said that leads to something bad. What's the no link argument? You said the plan would spill over to something that certainly links. Quickly, I'd imagine, especially if it's about the arms control agreement that you said is coming in December.
No, it's just a reason why we access our link.
Okay, so eventually, once the plan leads to a spillover in arms control with Russia, you would help Obama's capital. How would that help him this month in building settlements? Rejecting settlements?
Well, START seems like a very relevant concern to Obama's agenda right now. The plan will be certainly consistent with a bunch of other stuff that he's doing in the status quo with START.
Okay, other stuff that's happening in the status quo, like this Halsey evidence, talks about how Congress is a really, really busy place. It's facing things like...
Sure, that's sort of underselling our evidence. It
Sure,
says
okay,
that
I'll
it's
cite
like
them all.
a congressional nightmare.
Sure, okay,
That
I'll...
they're stuck in a logjam and
I
they
don't
list like
see-
7 things.
I don't see logjam or nine here. That's in the tag certain. We give us 7 things. Which of those does it say Obama's pushing? What's he doing with the highway bill that it says Congress is debating over back and forth the pet project? What's his role?
A legislative train wreck, by the way. Sorry, it wasn't the right funny.
Right. But Obama's capital is the one that's
Okay,
perceived
sorry,
by
I
other
wasn't
countries.
listening to
It's
your
not a
question because I
Congress.
was trying to distribute.
Yeah, it's not a docket link. It's not really a Congress link. It's perception of Obama's capital to other foreign governments. What's this piece of evidence?
Boy, would healthcare to his perception to international governments. Boy, would the Patriot Act, Afghanistan, all of those things
Boy,
are
Jordan's really good. Okay, Jordan and healthcare.
Yeah, Jordan in the plan.
Okay, first of all, Jordan the plan. Second of all, Jordan and the Patriot Act cares. Jordan and Afghanistan definitely cares.
Okay. Everybody's really mad right now in the status quo, and it's kind of, I guess it's such that they're mad at each other. What does that do to disprove why the peace process is important? Everyone's really mad. That's the argument that one is.
That was not an impact claim. That was a uniqueness
You're about to
claim.
do. Everybody is really mad. Things are about to go really badly. I don't understand what this does to complicate this stuff.
It disproves uniqueness. It proves that the peace process is going to
Why?
fail.
That's why we need the peace process. If there was peace, why the hell do we need a peace process?
You know, I think Eric would agree that the main component of that argument is a function of uniqueness. It proves that it can't fail any more than it's already failing.
Okay, Congress will
That's how
ignore
you
the
make
plan. We read evidence in 1 and C that said Congress is constitutionally obligated to authorize no first use, and I don't know, you read evidence that said that could be bypassed, but I don't know if there's a contestation to argument that's true. Then you said Congress will ignore the plan. How can those two things function simultaneously to disallow it?
Okay, that says that Congress isn't going to flip out about the plan because they're pushing too many things at once. It's a blitzkrieg in the Congress. That Obama's getting a bunch of little things through and the Congress doesn't care.
9:35.
Who's that? That's 2 and C. That's 2 and C.
Connor, you're pulling with the plan or how you started walking. Conditionality and then conditionality of the plan.
I heard about those. What was the one?
Strategy, time, argument development, that's all the options.
Alright, I'm up to it. Yep. Okay, sorry, 2 more seconds. Alright, I'm up.
We thought of that. But I got 540. That's pretty good. I got
2 seconds.
well, I know, right?
Exact minutes, my credibility that much.
You are getting
The order was labs, Congress, Russian QPQ telephone,
All right.
Move a little bit left.
Russia. Yep.
Nancy.
Can you tell him to move? We always videotape.
my computer, I kept on the best, sometimes does it, it froze. It's all saved, I just restarted. I vote yes.
What the alternative
Basically, I cried.
I vote
That's how I choose.
When I'm done, you can
cry, then what do you do? Oh, yeah. I want to see some tears. You gotta work through this. And I want to really, I need some onion.
It's my birthday on Friday. That's just, it took
Oh, I'm
my
just gonna vote for them, man. It's not your birthday, is it, right? Have you got a birthday lately? Or you got a birthday soon? How about Christmas? All right, so we got labs, Congress, Russia counter plan, and data.
I think so. It's all right.
Can I use the picture papers in case?
Happy birthday to Brian.
Happy birthday has been redone and re-recorded. That's like 100 songs.
It's time for the lead.
Yeah, no, but it's still like.
I did survive a year after my 21st birthday, which is kind of cool.
Next year, you're 1 year closer to your Jordan birthday.
So everybody in my family.
Are you placated by LeBron's deal? Number 23. Oh, you observed this? When they put him in the Hall of Fame, they said, you have to give him that regular 23, and he urged everybody else to be a word for 23 to give it up as well. But every team should retire number 23.
No way. No way.
I would like.
He's going to switch to Bill Russell's.
There was a Slater Hay against West Georgia last year.
When you have to get 23, I was figuring out quick over him.
There was nothing.
He's taking the bus.
He is, yeah, that's the messed up part. Like, I'm taking the second up.
Cool. You staying tonight?
If you had played for the Bulls and he was 23, that'd be one.
All right, how are we doing?
We're doing well. It started out the local document.
We haven't done any of it.
Make sure.
I think Jackie Robinson is the only player who's retired member. I think that's it in baseball.
That's quite good. But the numbers also are like, that's a good position. It's not like,
So you can.
All right, you're taking away from our decision time, so if at the end of the night we vote for Michigan State and say that, you know, if we had a little bit more time to buy it, then we did that.
We have to flip a coin, Michigan.
Yeah. So ties go to Michigan State.
it's his birthday.
You're ruining it too.
We encountered the birthday thing at least though. Now you're not just going to automatically vote for it. It's a react squirrel.
Presumption.
Flip a coin 3 times. Lands the same way out 3 times in birthdays.
Computer freezes when you tap it on shit.
You know, like if you like
You don't know how to
stuff,
Like,
it
also
like
turns
locks the
around,
hard
like,
drive
it's
down,
like-
so it thinks that it's like falling. Yeah, my computer just has. What's it? Yeah,
Are you sure the case is not in the law? Email these stuff in.
No, it's a
That's different.
Sounds like rain. It's like, they don't like.
Yeah, it's a technical test. That's
What?
you should take a
Good
call.
call, Coach.
Like, people like
Oh, yeah, no, like for football, email critical evidence.
Yeah, blame the brown guy. I wasn't even awake for this. Obviously, a scapegoat.
It's just like being very slow.
Do you think
You should tell the story. I think it's good.
It's not a story. Every Cinco de Mayo, Jennings calls me and drunk, wishes me happy Cinco de Mayo. He bought me. He's purchased me a Mexican flag on 3 different occasions.
so? Like that shit that Sammy Sosa did to turn himself white. Did you do like the opposite? Is that what it started?
I'm about to, maybe.
No, the whole thing is just like it saves it and freezes it.
Okay, it looks like
It's opening up something
It's
that
like
we
first
never
game.
all right. We have progress.
3.
It's probably all good.
So what the hell you got it spoken by the wheel?
Where did that come from?
I'm just kidding. That's the obvious joke. I'll say congratulations. No, just congratulations.
Thank you.
With the joke about.
Right.
Yeah, that's
2 and 6. But I was looking for a
What does
rose.
racial story?
Yeah, I kind of what do they call my name
I really don't remember what's going on.
Correct.
That helps.
Lapse disadvantage not going for. We'll concede there's no impact to this argument. The Congress counterplan. They concede the permutation. We're not going for this. It's conditional. We'll win the theory debate. Go there now. The counterplan also not going for. The permutations are just a test of competition. Conditionality is good versus our counterinterpretation. 2. Conditional counterplans. All policy options are predictable for the affirmative. They should design their 2AC accordingly. Second, it increases critical thinking, moral sleeps, and more research. The multiple worlds allow us to look at arguments from different perspectives. 3. It is key to reciprocity. After mutations are conditional. Forces us to journey offensive. We may lose 4 forces. Abstinent debate is necessary to making being more difficult than the new and thoughtful answers. So 5. Read atoms. The counterplan doesn't capture. You still get to generate your offense. 6. No abuse would have made other arguments which make certain time strategies. Few arguments inevitable. Multiple permutations are worse. They get the multiple conditional worlds. The voting issue for competitive equity. Additionally, time and strategy. Skew are inevitable, which are the only 2 AC warrants do not allow from 1 ER. A expansion upon them because their counterinterpretation is one of 1 conditional advocacy that would allow the negative to kick in at any time throughout the debate. The NATO disadvantage. There is no impact defense in the 2 AC. You have conceded the Brzezinski evidence, which indicates that a unified NATO is necessary to de-escalate all of the conflicts present in the 1 AC. It would also solve your accidents and miscalculation scenarios. I detailed in the cross-examination of the 1 AC how small response times are only subject to military planning situations. The NATO cooperative would allow for nations to know the full cost of taking action means that would restrain their accidental launch capacities. Do not allow for 2 hour extrapolation of impact defense read on the case advantage to apply here. Additionally, it de-escalates all of the F's wars means that their probability statements should be coming first in the risk over a relative risk of the late because it ameliorates all of their magnitude first times made in the 1 AC. Additionally, turns the case NATO's key to energy cooperation roster 1027 engagement will be required as NATO continues to engage Russia to peaceful management of the Arctic Marine Sea mechanism which forces on the transnational protection of energy infrastructure are warranted. New security arrangements are comfortable between NATO members and non-member states. There is no need to abandon new security deal with the NATO will be most certainly expected to respond to NATO's unprecedented success of the world factor and vital clash on security organizations on the contingent ability to create a new and emerging threat of energy and security nexus is already part of the new security landscape. Additionally, NATO prevents Russia-China war over Siberian resources and instigates all of your Russia scenarios. Touted 2K2 Russians more generally partner of NATO geopolitical rivals of Russians from China as a superior environment. They are rich in resources and they are barren in population. While the opposite is true onto the Chinese side, that supremacy is a recipe for conflict. The SEO might serve as a useful starting point for engaging China network of NATO-sponsored invasion security structures. NATO may be an ameliorating agent in relations. Additionally, I'll frontline your cuts now. Arguments cross-application first. The current cuts are rhetoric. They will not affect nuclear posture as a strategic concept that's assumed by the 1 AC rule of. And second, strategic nuclear reductions will not affect NATO Tetris and 2K7. Further, reductions will be unlikely to be seriously impacted in NATO. It is hard to imagine how many unilateral reductions in stockpiles would make them less able to maintain the extended endurance in today's environment. The first argument is that it promotes NATO unity. This evidence indicates that this would be a form of fresh thinking. The card itself acknowledges his own surprise at how stupid this argument is. So notice the portion where he says, "Ha! How would this be true?" Then it's because it's nonsensical. It would be a new form of thinking. It's not a reason as to why it would increase cohesion. It's just a reason as to why it would create a new debate. You have considered the thesis of our disadvantage, which is that we would have to pull out of the strategic concept discussions in the nuclear posture review at the NATO group. This would collapse it, and our evidence is pretty definitive on the point that this is the linchpin of the alliance. Means it would solve all of your internal as to why collapse might be inevitable or the possibilities for the future and relevancy of your organization because it is now. You have already conceded that it is going to be reformed in an upcoming Congress. I'll extend our link arguments. First is the new strategic concept will not include substantial changes in the employment of policy because of the raises red flags from open Pandora's box that can rupture the alliance. That's a rule. Evidence additionally, NFU would damage NATO since it's a key member seen as an aberration of our security commitments and a green light for aggression. That's our Yoast evidence, and the new strategic concept is crucial to revitalize NATO and hope it to adapt Shia 2K7. A new strategic concept will allow plans to recommitting to a NATO and should be helped to generate the resources necessary to achieve objectives that determine political opinions back with the direct evolution and communicating clear nationality. Helpful this is an achievement set as a set of tests, and the NFU would require NATO to adjust its nuclear posture. The U.S. would have to pull out this would tear apart the alliance and undermine the strategic concept. Espinosa 94, how to resolve the economy between the NFU and NATO's nuclear posture must be addressed. The essential role played by nuclear forces on underscore their postures and starting the NATO intends to foster and certain NFU could be undermined, and the strategic concept would be necessitated a revision of the new nuclear posture. This challenge would be able to revise the component without tearing apart the alliance. Would not be feasible for the U.S. to incorporate the NFU into the national posture while rejecting an option from within NATO for the U.S. to remain integrated. Would be necessary for NATO to adopt an NFU, and the NFU would gut the alliance at a time when its purpose is being redefined. Espinosa 94, France would oppose this division that severely demonstrations with their purpose being redefined for the NFU would destroy the confidence of European as a community and the alliance as a community and risk and endanger unity. The notion that the NFU could unify interests is questionable if defense and integration to be prematurely by this stability of Europe could be jeopardized, and the NFU would damage the alliance irrevocably by undermining the defense commitments at the heart of the alliance. Yoast 99, the implication would be that the conditions of the undertaken without
link to the credibility of extended present willingness to use nuclear weapons to equal the original first use, but could one of the contingencies which vehicle force would be relevant to the fact the cohesion and willingness to host these sports presenting the NATO sport function of the collective defense has been seen as a priority for collective defense represents the parties of organization changing the all those NATO's purpose their representation of sport and the government is not getting regards to any aggressors for enough virtues pledged to be undermining deterrence and U.S. security commitments, and these arguments still apply. NATO still holds the nuclear first use as a critical component of policy. YOS 2K9 throughout the alliance use nuclear weapons of uses of very important the concepts of crisis management, and NATO governments have consistently agreed that aggressors will be convinced through NATO retains all options license not reused or ruled out retaliating through the adoption of an NFU. They say NATO is reducing alliance. It's irrelevant. You destroy the strategic concept meeting up on the cuts now argument above. This evidence is about cohesion, which is the only internal link to any impact. Additionally, on civil alliance, YOS evidence, which indicates that members feel NATO is necessary to prevent aggression. This evidence for us is specifically within nuclear weapons complex. Additionally, nukes make a renaissance in NATO for reasons. Camp 2K9, there has been a renaissance of nuclear into the international conflicts and increase the number of nuclear players. Energy scarcity should detonate the directed on the economic and danger will be the top of this agenda. Russian action against structures like Iran, the nuclear issues question on the sincerity of the NATO security insurance sponsor could believe have made their way back into the fire. They say that the collapse is inevitable. This evidence is not about NATO cohesion, but rather just a way in which NATO could encourage different types of conflicts. I've extended our uniqueness arguments about how those conflicts will be mediated in the status quo. You have no argument that its response to this evidence is also simply too old to have any internal warrant to it. They say take up, make collapse inevitable. This evidence is also not about any form of collaboration that was necessary to cohesion. The strategic arguments I made above answered. Additionally, this evidence from the CEO of fucking Lockheed Martin, which means Lockheed Martin, which means he's just pushing for American national policy, saying that we need a strong technical force so that we do not have to commit to NATO's forces overall. It's just a reason why he wants to persuade U.S. policymakers to buy more of his shit. Additionally, the new strategic concept will reinvigorate the alliance. 2K7.
I'll read this.
No, I didn't. A new strategic concept will allow the alliance to ensure that North America and the Europe can reconnect NATO and transform the strategic concept will also be granted with the resource necessary to be the alliance objective given the communicating with the rational will be coupled, and this makes it more tiring about the ability to live in peace in the next generation, and faltering the European organizations, grand reintegration and expansion will solve the alliance when around 2K9. NATO is relevant will the EU struggling with the internal reforms. The OSCE has lost relevance to NATO floating the friend that into military restrictions members united the two worlds of Albania and Croatia will join, and NATO is still healthy but risk collapse if it loses tracks of its core defense commitments. Foster 2K9. Some of main tech officers will be directing the new strategic concept. NATO is relevant. Shall be careful not to take one more test. NATO, if NATO succeeds, will stay healthy. There is no one under institution that can take over. NATO is healthy, but needs to plan its future more carefully. Our evidence right above also indicates that the strategic concept they will redelegate the way in which resources have been in the past. So your tech gap arguments and the reasons why economic decline would cause it to collapse. This argument also doesn't make sense in the context of your next piece of evidence, which indicate that it would undermine the role of NATO. This evidence is assumptive of the claim that NATO would actually adopt the NFU that the U.S. presents. This is not true after we win our link arguments, which are for the most part conceded, which indicates it would collapse the strategic cooperation organization before it actually accesses it. The rest of my speech will be spent reading cards, but I will answer this not argument at the bottom of the debate, which says the 1AC deterrence evidence means that the NATO cohesion would not solve. I do not know what this means. They should not get credibility for it. You make it an argument, we'll answer it then. Now to answer the idea that NATO would adopt the policy. This is irrelevant. This does not take out the link to the disadvantage. Debates about the employment policy would open up Pandora's box and cut defense commitments to that. That's a rule in OS evidence. And even if NATO would eventually adopt an NFU, that would take time, and it would force the U.S. to withdraw from NATO in the interim, collapsing the alliance. That's an Espinoza evidence. Additionally, NATO would reject an NFU and reoption defense commitments in the alliance. Miller, 2K2, the American security guarantee between $4 million defense willingness to use nuclear weapons first because first, use of weapons they court to security relations those thoughts to close the mortal will be directed to security arrangement to undermine the alliance to the state. NATO firmly rejects NFU and NATO. The NFU does nothing to help things form them in 2K7. I am very doubtful there is a mileage of the NATO to go or the NATO need or should leave. Its nuclear doctrine behind windows are area. The likelihood of nuclear weapons coming into play is not possible. I never seen merit in the no first use pledge promises are a mere window addressing that cannot change reality. And I believe that this would be any of the political violence, no grounds for attempting to win. And it's already done by NATO nuclear members. If there is no more political risk of opening up contentious new debate, additionally, even if the deal was struck, the consequences to the alliance would be great. Espinoza 94 adopting and NFU would alter the U.S. military purposes of deterrence responsibilities.
Okay. So, your argument is that there is a new review process coming up, right? That the plan sort of derails unity at that review. Is that?
I mean, that's a very gross simplification, but yeah.
Okay. So, have you read evidence that that will successfully negotiate energy cooperation in the status quo? Do you have uniqueness to your discussions of case argument? Where?
It's a piece of evidence that I labeled as the resource disparity argument, that they are reassessing the ways in which they take resources from members of NATO and also the way in which they redelegate these issues.
Which card is that?
I think it's the second piece of unique evidence.
That's this card.
resources you got dispersed here.
Okay, it says that they're renegotiating those in the status quo. My question is whether or not they will be successful.
Evidence indicates that the strategic concept review is going to be successful.
A new strategic concept would allow the alliance to show that North America and Europeans are committed to NATO that has been transformed to deal proactively
This is clear. I came with
with
this
threats.
question for quite so long. The piece of evidence we read at the top of the impact argument also indicates that globally NATO is a
Okay, I don't.
Even if
Can you show me in either of those pieces of evidence where that is going to be successful in the status quo, where you have uniqueness to your disadvantage case
okay.
argument?
I believe I've done that with uniqueness. Well, we can pull over that for a second, but I think it's irrelevant because that piece of evidence right at the top of it, the impact card, indicates that it creates a framework for settling these forms.
No, it says that if the review were successful, that it would negotiate Arctic conflict. You haven't read a card that it will be a successful negotiation of Arctic conflict.
Yes.
This is your intro into energy cooperation. I'm trying to understand how you hope to solve energy cooperation when cooperation is not going to be solved for via NATO and the status quo.
Well, in addition to NATO and the status quo being pushed towards energy cooperation, you've read evidence that indicates that they're going to sort out these issues.
If a new strategic concept would have, if it would
We
have.
have read 5 pieces of evidence which indicate that this is going to be a successful conference. The 2AC mentions this 0 times. There is no comparison. This is a conceded argument of uniqueness.
Okay, 5 uniqueness cards. NATO is welcoming France back to its military structures and members are united.
Not the cards about NATO strength, the cards about the success of the strategic concept.
Okay, what cards do you think that's the Shea evidence? What else?
No, I think the Shea evidence talks about the success of the resource portion.
Okay, what cards say that the strategic, what 5 uniqueness cards did you read that the strategic concept is going to be
evidence is the
successful?
rule evidence. The Yoast evidence also indicates, which is a piece of link evidence that also indicates that it's going to be successful if we move away from nuclear policy issues at this conference. There was 3 pieces of uniqueness evidence. Can't quote my name.
Okay. NATO governments have confessed that aggressors must be convinced that this isn't talking about the strategic concept, the Yoast evidence.
You're reading the link one.
That's where you told me your Yoast
Yoast evidence
was.
from the 1 and C. We've read 4 cards from them. I'm sorry I wasn't that
Okay,
specific.
can I see the 1 and C uniqueness cards then?
I don't have the
can-
1 and C.
Okay. So the only uniqueness cards that have been introduced are uniqueness cards from the 1 and C. So if I find those. Okay, okay. Okay, your Yoast evidence is obviously not about a strategic concept. It's from 1999.
That evidence indicates that you're looking at the link.
Okay, then can we like take a second? Like, where do you think your Yoast uniqueness evidence is?
Might be a rolly or whatever.
No, that's the first one.
In order will be politics, cooperation, like cooperation advantage. Then first use advantage, and then the miscount advantage.
I don't think I have any of the 1 and C to.
I think it's on the top slide. Here's the rest of the list.
Peace process, co-op, Russia. Right? You just said.
All right.
What's up, dude?
Okay, everybody good to go?
It is that always intrinsic case, 6 point is faster than the Cold War. As ended a long time ago, we've never watched a nuclear weapons ever slipping near and watched God's attention made high depths in Obama's direction to derail the peace process flag is an act of repetition of subsequent peace point. Certainty, religious war is inevitable to the sales from butters, 1028 disputes are stable before them. Just a secretary of battle, 120 for the absolute represents the 2 sides. May be had for new confrontation, tensions, and the involved conceded the conflict would take place. They've only questioned whether or not it would escalate. Now, intrinsic case in several ways. First, it would cause conflict and scintillation, forcing some terrorists to send the elements of the U.S. will only be a matter of time before Israel and the U.S. consider the wide war. But then, as you already know, once Israel launches war, things will shock of the nuclear weapons, which causes a nuclear war. Sorry, that's the Israeli strikes impact. Here's the impact. It says that it causes the war in Central Lake, Chaskovsky, and 7 nuclear holocaust. Could potentially spread the largest release the war would eventually engulf in Central Asia into war. Would World War III. Additionally, it turns out because it produces U.S. state of high alert, which causes perception within it, which causes an immediate perception of crisis government after the Egyptian request to tensions to force the Israeli to abide by ceasefire. The U.S. placed the military in the highest state of war in the world to the brink of nuclear war at the time the U.S. had bigger fish to fight Vietnam, China, the Soviet Union, kissing for the 50th time. Generally, between Moscow, Cairo, and Tel Aviv. Now, the first argument is that Congress is dealing with other things that also cross-examination. They have no evidence that says Obama is dealing with this. It means that Congress is distracted from the status quo and cannot engage in a large issue. If the plan engages Obama in 2 top-level international level agreements, which is what our Walt evidence describes, then it's important to preempt one of the arguments that's talking about other things. It's about sequencing those large items out on the document, which answers whether it needs to look at say from the cross-examination. Now, the Peace Process Doom doesn't answer the 1 and C. Well, evidence say there are necessities failed on settlements. There are necessities trying to reverse cancel within the status quo. Yes, yes, he has done more than the past. That's what he's trying to reverse. Here's evidence that says he still has the trump card on settlements, but he has to demonstrate resolve to use it. Sullivan 1117 Obama made an initial stop to settlements. Israel said no in this first step. Israel 1 this way be used to pledge to commit that in final sense. The question is only skirmish and one thing in the long run. Obama maintains one key advantage America's dealing with Senator Peace and Obama is Israel by the in the long run. Obama is Israel by the immense most Obama can't push you more forcefully for peace process. Even crisis makes some moment of truth and never lovely civilness that Obama tried, which is in itself useful for building trust with peace. It's not a question of whether or not he sees, but whether or not he's perceived to be invested. Additionally, Obama is pushing the peace process. Time is running out. Let's often 1/6 conversion Palestinians accept American modification safety settlement policy return the bargaining table words of considerable Obama starts typical state detail peace process only matter of time. The foreign loss capable of the US on rockets, the US and Obama people ready to the peace process. Additionally, something always says that there are barriers to the status quo. Yes, the peace process is not perfect. That's why he needs political capital. That only spots to see internally. They say the plan is to win. Look, you should apply their link shield arguments that they're linked. As well, their evidence only discusses an arms control with Russia. They won't get to that in a long negotiation. They've conceded that the next month is key.
What's up? Intrinsicness was recommended.
No, additionally, they say intrinsicness is bad. For reasons, for instance, it takes our ability to generate generic necessities are crucial. These are crucial to check no affirms are also crucial. They're also crucial in topic words to be incredibly difficult to generate uniqueness. It's especially important today. We have to do it to learn about the congressional process, which is the only thing that spills over to the real world. Additionally, the plan costs capital with Congress, public key, military targets, and the military national interest in 9 Obama wants to eliminate all nuclear ones. American military very keen on Obama states to resent from the energy defense department's legislature military to take a lot more friends and have to. Then it's a general to the Senate to the administration use of capital fund the Pentagon around control Obama be fine. Dealing with the Colonel what's the easy part now. They say there's no link to Congress over the plan simply says that there are a lot of things going on with the status quo. Does not say that they're not perceived. It says it's difficult to concentrate on all of them. It's the reason why Obama has to demonstrate focus and why the status quo, the status quo is uniquely tested. I considered no Middle East war because of conventional weaknesses. It doesn't answer our argument about street level conflicts about the Middle East. Our evidence is incredibly specific to the perception of Jordan from Saudi Arabia, and that being put a ticking nuclear bomb. We have evidence about certainty, which whatever percent the film like apples not key here's, or evidence addition to the one CSI 9 Obama version is absolutely critical. These fires unless the result of cost reveal and steel unless there's invest substantial political capital and she solution for Obama's tradition, the cost of inaction with greatest cost of acting not succeeding long as the active war. It hundreds of dollars across the region spreads recruited by Al-Qaeda and other truths. Now, cooperation.
Answer Israel strikes inevitable takes out.
Oh, they say Israeli strikes inevitable doesn't take out the impact. It's not about Israeli strikes in Iran. It's about a street level conflict between the United States between Israel and Palestine. It's specifically tied to the emotional and historical status, not just Middle East conflict. For the same reason why there are other impact defenses imply cooperation. Top of the debate, they have functionally dropped the disadvantage returns and always open other arguments that the nationalists game counter after the plan that they obviously wouldn't be able to cooperate, and they would not renounce first use from plan. The current evidence says that the Russian people are the driving force of country policies. It does not say that the United States would be able to get into any way change the common stance. They consider the Parasarti evidence that there's a Delphin balance within the status quo that they're engaging on the MPT and start, but they were moving away from doing too much. The reason, for instance, described in our Stott evidence argument says that hardliners will use a position of weakness to attack that they've conceded that the link turn is not able to access or Qatar evidence that he does, and James does because they'll still get pressure either way, which is the reason he'll be attacked. Additionally, the evidence is only about popularity. One insight, Bevan Cohen in 7 people kind of deal for the House of Talk, which loses secret police channels and manpower behind Russia. Think American ransom with policy influence is not likely to advance between the return revenues from after the zone. Well, depend on their support. Now, first piece. Obviously, what I just said answers a lot of their advantage. They say we don't have any. They say either Russia and China. They have 4 impacts, and you have absolutely 0 solvency evidence. The first piece of evidence that you read is not the first piece of evidence they read on this question is not reverse causal. It simply says that they would reconsider changing price of doctrine. It's not saying they would get rid of first piece or second piece of evidence. Says they want this more than they ever wanted before. It's only bolsters our paying and wrong evidence makes 3 claims. Number 1 is that because of conventional inferiority, Russia would refuse to ever give up its nuclear first strike. The second is that they would never give it up for 2 reasons. That they would not get anything returned. First, they would pocket the concessions, which is an argument we're conceding for the condition counter plan. and empirically, when they renounce it during the Soviet Union, they didn't get anything back, not going for the gas impact. However, it also takes out the copies impact because there will be cooperation over things like Ukraine with the status quo. Conventional weapons for terrorists doesn't answer any portion of our evidence. If they got conventional weapons, would simply be treated as another conventional conflict war. Obviously, the way they say they're all in situation, they've conceded that there are some reasons why the Soviet incentives to cooperate, or why some insights things like terrorism and other things, which will also be able to independently solve their internal, like they say, that our evidence doesn't assume. Europe, our evidence says that they're still incredibly united. Obviously, there's very low chance of European breakup. Didn't happen during the Orange Revolution with Georgia's friend independence. Is not going to happen now. Accidents. However, they didn't answer that they did not get rid of the arsenal. They did not get rid of first use force China, which means that they did not solve the risk of accidents. They've also conceded that they are targeted towards the ocean, which is the Slocum evidence. Even if they, Russians have the dead hand, they never reach Russian airspace, and obviously they never use it. It's not empirically not or stopping evidence, as well as public evidence says that Russia would not rely on it, which is the reason why they wouldn't use it. They have also conceded stocking evidence that says there's zero probability for it. They've also conceded those pieces of waltz evidence that says that when escalate. Finally, they've also conceded the safeguards argument. Even if they win, that pre-delegation makes these things more likely. None of these things make them probable. Still pretty low.
Yep.
Hey guys, you don't mind asking how much you
Hold on. 5 points. You have 5 points.
These are the national
No, I am fine. Everyone's like, asking each other. We got 9 minutes. 9 minutes. Oh, that's the one I gave them. Remember when I said that's the rest of the show? Was it when MSU? Yeah, it was the original one.
Yeah.
Yep. Sorry, I gave that to him thinking that the other one.
Yeah, there's not.
Here in the hall.
standing right there with you.
I'll grab him.
One more fun with that.
Felt kind of bad.
I thought everything was in control. Not to do it hard. You take the framework of this ad. I was sitting here trying to figure out all this MIR nonsense. They turned the link card around. I wasn't feeling too good except for that big splotch of ink up there about the closing pig, which I didn't believe next to it. That was kind of comfortable, but. All right.
The cooperation advantage.
Yep.
The first use advantage.
Yep.
The miscalculation advantage.
Yep.
The labs DA.
Yep.
The peace process DA.
Okay. That's it.
And then the Navy.
Oh,
Hang on, we'll take a second.
Oh yeah. The QP2 counter plan is in the mix too. Yeah, let's put that at the top.
all right, so QPQ then, co-op.
Yeah.
Ready?
Yep.
Quid pro quo countermeasures are bad, making it impossible to be affirmative. This was flagged as the reason that the 2AC that you should reject the team as a deterrent value. It destroys 2AC flexibility because it steals the entire affirmative. It just leverages the 1AC advantage against itself, makes it impossible to be affirmative. It also sets a deterrent value. Seated argument means you should have a lower threshold. Multiple permutations are not. Worse, they're just has a competition, not advocacy. Means you can't win any uniqueness with this argument. Also, they are inevitable because you read two counterplans. We only read one counterplan against each one of them. Solves the cooperation advantage at the top. We can control uniqueness. The threat team for emboldening hardliners. Now that's our strat for evidence. We have the most specific piece of evidence about the plan. None other evidence about no first use. Here, Scott evidence is about ballistic missile defense. Now the plan was already a concession. Also, which means it goes the right opposite direction. There's tar evidence, which is tagged as no link turns doesn't assume the plan either. The plan is a win for Medvedev. That's our ACCOM and Acton and SOCOM evidence indicates that he can use it as leverage against the hardliners. Means there's only a risk of solvency in our direction. The link only goes in one direction because we are because of uniqueness. Also, they say that popularity can only hurt Medvedev. That evidence is also vanishes about secret police is something that status quo over time. It's also first use advantage at the top. Dr. Norbeck's China war inevitable. No impact evens means 100% risk of extinction that escalates because Russia would be used to lose it pressure. We have reverse causal evidence. Our active evidence also no answer to the SOCOM evidence in the 2AC that they mirror our policy. The only reason they have first strike doctors because we do also our Random-Botsky evidence indicates that changes are only happening now means we do have multiple pieces. It also answers a conventional inferiority argument indicates that is an outdated model that Russia doesn't think they need it anyway. The hockey concession argument, no flag decided what they're conceding means I don't know which 2AC argument means they shouldn't give them any credit for this. That was a 2NC's argument about extending 2AC arguments, which means actually the standard you use for it. Also, they wouldn't pocket the plans concession that was all above and whether taking out credibility. The gas doesn't take out caucus, it's just limited to Ukraine. Our argument is the caucus is the right flashpoint. It's the reason why first use policy makes inevitable terrorism. Look, Chechen terrorism probably wouldn't go nuclear, it wouldn't use nuclear weapons. It's the reason why air impact defense doesn't apply, but it does cause U.S. retaliations. Of course, the evidence no cooperation and the status quo. Only the plan is able to spur cooperation on all these issues because first use is poisoning the rest of the agenda. They see Europe is united now. That doesn't assume that doesn't assume the world. That doesn't assume future things that are going to distort. It also doesn't assume Ukraine collapsing. Our evidence indicates that it's on the ring now because the Orange Revolution answers short. In fact, the miscalculation to the top. They say first use targeting against China, but that doesn't trigger our dead hand thing. Only the risk of first strikes against Russia matter because we would detarget them after the plan, which means dead hand zero. In fact, defense, even if it went into the ocean, their radar strains would detect machines and would trigger automatic launches to default to the 1AC to add the specificity of the evidence on this question. Also, they say that all these probability arguments, look, we're the only ones that have read evidence that the U.S. and Russian war escalates to extinction, which means it's the only thing that should come first in your calculus. Any other impact is largely irrelevant, which that also conceded the House evidence that we posted, more specific, that's fine. The last is that, well, they conceded start at the top of the docket, because obviously it's going to trigger a lot of the dissent links. It specifically tanks NATO cohesion. This lesson during 2009, even though the less expansion NATO, the rest of Chinese forces did become required to hold force remains in regular life for Britain, but how less powerful NATO, where the Russian would cast in direction of nuclear force rebel, the Russian touching line of nuclear emphasis on attacking nuclear weapons, consequently we should not engage in auto reduction, nuclear force start reduction, result by the negotiation and such reduction, and of course we discussed with our allies, since we're not consulting over start now, triggered the link, but also the United States would unilaterally commit to the 2AC card. It says on this question is the reason why it triggers 100% of the list of the rate, because it said that how peace process is at a time you can't turn the case. The only internally escalation of these conflicts is Russian mercy use doctrine, which the claim is the only thing that can reverse the peace, even if they when they spill over to that region. No nuclear escalation makes it across the House and Congress or a logjam. All of these trade of the peace process. Australia 925 is difficult. Always conflict, failure, Israeli peace, someone coming with financial crisis, constitution, negotiation, trade, feed Afghanistan, the need to represent. Here's evidence that our government applies to the Peace Process Act of 1929, 28 Obama not to tell the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, we never can just help the Afghanistan, Iran, nuclear, child resolution, more than threatens the election. This process is present like to know its priorities. The next argument is unique. It's been extended across the said now. Their evidence is a hypothetical, which we're taking our 2C evidence actually says the con chances of it passing. The insurgents targets not a reason to reject the image across the plan. Builds political capital because it's win, just because it's a big fight. Actually, is the reason why the direction is the reverse. Very little answer is winners win means that it's a huge leverage point for Obama. The final argument is the PC key evidence. All of their evidence is news writers are not using it in the exacting sense of the phrase. It's not key. Then limited Obama hopes style government leads a breakthrough belt that back to first years found really went in the wrong way. Now the argument at the bottom, extended across Israeli strikes are inevitable. There's no answer to this argument. The status quo triggers 100% of the dissent. It takes out the peace process some more. 2007 in Iraq and Republic, Trump, political action, Washington, Liverpool, Sunni, acts reason the peace process would be fatally wounded. Also, takes the political capital length is Kelly in 2008, Trump for prejudice, use Bolton, Reagan, Afghanistan, complicated administration were involved politically, and it also triggers tornado dissent. This is all 2011, but our American friends of 8 years from take to impose military action was talking to the Iranians, Merkels after the European people were to be shorting about use military. It would be the end of NATO, it would be the end of use European consistent on having a security assessment, it would be disastrous, triggers 100%. So they say they don't need to question the internal links in these arguments. Now the NATO said at the top are perfect, which evidence indicates you can't win deterrence the case argument because extended deterrence does not work with Russia. This argument from 2009 postdates all of their evidence, is true, doesn't assume the current security environment. This is also will take the Pepsi challenge. You have no evidence that the new strategy will succeed. Now the cross is embarrassing on this. You keep saying it's another piece of evidence. There is not a single card read by the negative that says it's either zero, very low. Like, even if they went a huge internal link to all these arguments, there's no uniqueness or any collapses. Never looked at across the treaty. Arguments are better indicators of structural constraints on the United States and NATO are moving apart. Cohesion has an all-time low. Afghanistan proves Michelle 2009 cycles of enlargement, stable, and effective, like Pacific, biggest for short times, policy formation, is that both fortune NATO consistent policy, including Afghanistan, place years military underground access to this low because of perception, and American special 2009 black bag military preparedness, Scott, 15 level relevant general affiliation, Atlantic Soviet, military dread of the European policy span, future military operation, how much longer important military meaningful, and this is across our tech argument. There's not a very good answer to this one either. And it indicates a technical gap between the two would make it inevitable. The Cuts argument is reductions don't hurt NATO. Argument is much more specific, and our card actually concedes. It was a unilateral without consulting with all, but now they functionally dropped a NATO modeling add-on. He says we don't have any good modeling. Argument indicates that because the doctrines are so in line with each other, that it would immediately require it. And without NATO reversing its no for shoes, guarantees escalation to nuclear conflict in theaters. Here's more evidence it would model this support in 2003. You argue the United States opposition high to no for shoes policy. United States leadership will observe how other countries save on nuclear weapons, specifically those, which means that all their impacts are inevitable. The fiat argument about kicking us out of NATO doesn't make sense. We're not getting kicked out of NATO, we simply modify our doctrine. Also, we have the only piece of 2009 evidence that indicates nuclear extended deterrence fails, which means all of our arguments about how conventional would reassure themselves in seriously no uniqueness. Yeah.
540. pretty good one.
I saw one of your teams against Elvis round 6. Whenever I see packet results, I'm excited. I don't think I'm going to call myself
What? The part where he says cuts don't hurt unilateral assault, you can see that says it's DA of the low disadvantage. Arguments before it has been modified.
He's saying, he's still talking about the argument, the card you had in the last issue.
Okay.
Like the, yeah.
We've been negative for 9 times, and they have to. I think that's an exaggeration. I just want to make the screen clear. We'll see. I'm not going to 3 times this year so far. 7. Yeah, that's true. Yeah, name them. So 8. Yeah, exactly.
Don't even worry about it there. Yeah.
Did you hear about Lou Dobbs might make a presidential run?
No.
Just him time out. Build a wall and get some machine gun turrets. Platform.
You said
Association.
He was like sitting there telling me to
Camo. It's pretty handy. Really cheap too. It's like $175. It's right at 2 hours.
The circumstances of the murder.
You guys doing some reading practice?
It was the New York Times, all the news could stand in print. But no, this one's, we sketched it, we're willing.
Saying be careful.
All right. All right, the order is politics. All right.
Okay, so yeah, what do I keep you?
Politics, QBQ, labs, NATO. Cooperation advantage, worldview advantage, the academic advantage.
How much time do we have?
3:30. Got it.
All right.
Colleagues, this band is not going forward with the political affluence and key area reserve strikes and everyone can also accept the impact means you can't very often there is no one as to why we collapse NATO Europe and in the case of whether the U.S. strike on run on an Israeli strike on brothers representative why we tried to do it this also doesn't have the same magnitude as any of our link arguments which you evaluate for listening to all of these arguments and recognize why other issues will overwhelm them. Their evidence is also not making any quantifiable time frame or reasons as to why we would have to pull out of the nuclear group in NATO immediately because of the plans of counted action. We wouldn't even be able to justify our action. We would literally be kicked the fuck out. The counter plan, the permutations will check all of your arguments that was conceded to its argument from the additionality debate. Also add-ons check, which means there's no ability for you to generate offensive command to add on to this specific type of policy that you're sitting in and unilateral action is justified by negative flexibility. We should be able to add and negate any policy we want. It's just a reason to reject the team because after innovation will be preference before any of their abuse. Thanks time and strategies to us inevitable. The lab's disadvantage, the triggers linked to NATO argument is nonsensical. The plan is a meeting which will make it irrelevant. Cons don't hurt the ability for NATO to maintain cohesion. Your evidence is not about NATO directly in our cuts now. Arguments make more sense than yours. Your evidence also is only talking about starting the highly theoretical context, not about the actual policy that's being put in place. Our uniqueness evidence is thus something about your additionally your evidence is about Russia's reaction to U.S. conduct, which is solved by the impact of the disadvantage, which means it's irrelevant because there's a time frame distinction from the link debate. The NATO disadvantage at the top. I still do not have a direct answer from the one in C presents. The evidence which indicates that the NATO cohesion is necessary to de-escalate the conflicts of the one in C presents and necessary and prevent future conflict by setting up arrangement that leads to conflict mediation. This is conceded internally as to why you should prefer probability over all of their magnitude claims, even even if they win, that Russia is the only scenario for extinction that's most mitigated and prevented by NATO cohesion, means that the probability statement goes only one direction. The Rosner evidence, which indicates it turns the case because it leads to energy cooperation. This evidence indicates that it would not only pass, but even if they win, it doesn't. It is irrelevant because it sets up the frame that's also answered by, also made an argument made by Brzezinski evidence. The 1 and C also is in the 2 and C evidence. I don't have a citation for it, which indicates at least to a Russia-China war turns the entirety of the F, because it would obviously involve a U.S. intervention into policy as the entire region would be lit up with nuclear weapons. Means there is no internal link to it. I have zero answers to either of these arguments, and the 1AR do not give new 2AR credibility. Your argument about how the new strategy is going to solve is only a question of the uniqueness debate, which will be below. They say collapse is inevitable structural constraint. No specific warrant here. There were 3 cards in the 2AC. I don't know which to answer. I don't have time to give the 2AR credibility for them. There is no internal link to any of these arguments. When you conceded the structural warrants that your evidence argument is all long term, there's a time for distinction on the link debate. I'll go there in a minute. They say the cohesion low arguments. This is only a question of uniqueness debate. Only so the cuts now portion of it, or to trace evidence much better than yours. He's a senior research fellow of the foundation of some French organization I can't pronounce, which indicates that further reductions are unlikely to have any effect on the policy. It's only a question about how we would strategically maintain our security assurances, which is the only thing the alliance was ever built upon in the first place, which means comparatively ours makes logically more sense as to why they would be freaked about not leaving all options on the table. The Shea evidence indicates that the strategic concept, which is also assumptive of all of the policies that you're presenting, will be aligned with one that is necessarily of a policy against no first use, not legally, not involve nuclear issues, but it will be positive for the United States because they will not have any disagreements. The only reason these strategic concepts are ever put together in the first place because of large doctrine shifts, i.e. us announcing an NFU policy. They don't understand the fact that the reason this would have to be started in the first place, and the reason that's why they would have to have this meeting, is because we would have to pull out of the nuclear group within NATO because we made a policy change, which means it's not a matter of whether it's successful, it's a matter of them having one in the first place. The new strategic reception would be an inevitability in the long term, which means there's only a chance of uniqueness for the negative on this disadvantage. It's also no offense extended reach. There's only a large risk of delay. They say the Afghanistan argument is answered by a monster evidence, which indicates post-states evidence indicates that European organization, France's reintegration and expansion will maintain cohesion for the long term. That answers their enlargement warrant as well. Additionally, our monster evidence is also better in indicating that it is a Barinko argument for us. They could lose their defense commitments, i.e. us assuming an NFU pledge that would overwhelm any of their internal links. That's why collapse might be inevitable in the long term. Their tech argument is conceded as being biased and is assumed by our uniqueness evidence. It is biased because it's a Lockheed Martin author trying to get the U.S. to pull out of NATO. They say cuts don't hurt. It's irrelevant. You can see the Jimmy Link arguments are Shea evidence indicates that it will reinvigorate the entirety of the alliance. Or Espinosa evidence indicates it's crucial to what they see as strategic commitments. Our Yost evidence qualifies this argument as the largest undermining of the defense commitments presented. It also provides us a unique time frame. Our 2009 evidence indicates it's a crucial issue of the alliance. The argument about why NATO would adopt an NFU is backwards. Our Miller evidence indicates it would reject an NFU and lead to a collapse of the alliance. Our Quinlan evidence says that it wouldn't have any effect on the NATO organization overall. Means it's not in that link term for the affirmative cooperation advantage. Women or nationalism arguments turn the entirety of the app. Your evidence is terrible on this point. Our Cohen evidence turn the one in our evidence indicates that we have uniqueness on our side, not yours. You missed this card. It indicates that the controlling the status quo, but our Stephen evidence indicates that concessions from the United States, i.e. the NFU doctrine, will inevitably push against them. The VMD doesn't trigger our link because our evidence is both assumptive of this and also isn't explicated in any of the YC evidence. It's just a generic cuts now argument. They have no internal link as to why it's being perceived as a policy of the YC. Your evidence is only about the public. Our evidence about the structure of their government means it's on that turn for the negative that they haven't made a direct answer to. The relations advantage. They have zero solvency evidence, which is causal for this. They have extended 2 pieces of evidence that just say that Russia is responsive to our doctrine. None of the evidence of the 1AC is conclusive on the point that Russia will renounce our NFU doctrine. The China war argument is not inevitable. It's a use or lose mentality on the world of institutions lacking cohesion, such as NATO. Additionally, the pocket concessions argument is not something we're going for. There isn't a theoretical extension of this argument. It also is taken all out by nationalism, which would tank the ability for Russia to manage these conflicts. The accidents advantage. You can see the Waltz evidence. This war would never escalate. Your dead hand argument is terrible. Your evidence is talking about a weapon that we theorize is hidden in a quartz mountain we've never seen. You should defer to a higher risk of probability that these weapons would not be hit there. It would also not be triggered because they'd be thrown in the ocean. Your evidence is not presumed responsive of this. That's our Stockton evidence. There's no probability of it.
The answer definitely not be well, that was because of Joe. Oh, that's the one.
All righty.
I was just gonna make this. Must be old room. Okay, Miss Goff. Cooperation. Russian first use. The peace process again, or just add. And then data. I was in the oh, you just like ready? Even if they win 100% of their arguments on this position, you largely miss the boat in the dead hand argument until the two and are too little too late there. It is not just purely theorizing our rules. The evidence is that they have dead hand in this code that any kind of miscalculation between the United States and Russia causes extinction. This is absent escalation, which means that even if you win escalation arguments, that it would still cause extinction. That is the Roosevelt evidence. You should read that in the context of our STAR evidence, which says that any nuclear use by Russia would cause extinction, even if it is dead. All detonated in the ocean, that it will cause smoke and warming and things that it will mess with the climate models, which causes extinction. This is not low probability. I'm sorry that you missed it and turned to our advantage until the 2 and R, but this proves that the probability of our advantage is very high. All of their arguments about dead hand being theoretical or not mean until the 2 and R, which means that you shouldn't probably even evaluate them. Your arguments about probability of whether or not they are hit or targeted are largely wrong. And our Roosevelt evidence says that when Russia unloads 2,000 nuclear weapons, that it would probably be pretty bad for all of humanity and that it would cause extinction. Absent your escalation arguments, probability magnitude should matter in this instance because it is the only existential risk. Our Roosevelt evidence contextualizes that. It says that if we win a relatively high risk of a high magnitude scenario, you should vote for it in the bet. That NATO cohesion, because of the bet, that the uniqueness to their that is questionable. The status quo means that you should vote affirmative to try or die for the affirmative on any of these questions because we they are controlling terminal and back uniqueness to many of these arguments. Now, the cooperation advantage, you have also conceded the Watson evidence that it causes extinction in the status quo. Yet also no two-end or reason why the dissent turns miscalculation. None. No argument about why the dissent would interact with their miscalculation arguments. Our Watson evidence says that reactor meltdown also causes extinction. Now, the Medvedev arguments, concessions are already going to be inevitable in the status quo because the start the 1AR card on Schlesinger already proves that we're making concessions over starting the status quo, which means that your concessions generic link argument is all inevitable. Your arguments, there's only a risk that the plant salts our Stratford evidence and the piece of 2C evidence all say that the nationalism is behind the status quo. There's only a risk that the plant salts back. The threats against Russia are what are creating a nationalist resentment in the status quo. The plan removes that incentive for nationalist resentment in Russia, which means that the plan is able to solve many of these arguments. Your arguments about a structural turn to the argument are wrong. It does not turn our miscalculation advantage. Nationalism has nothing to do with whether or not Russia would launch their jet against the United States and whether or not they would think a conventional strike is a nuclear strike, which is the reason why you do not turn any of the advantages that are largely relevant at the end of the round. Now, Russia, no first use, not going for, no first causal evidence that Russia was model of a plan. Your arguments about NATO being critical and solved are not enough. That proves that Russia, that a lot of these impacts are all inevitable. Things like Russia-China war terrorism in the Caucasus and Central Asia instability are all inevitable. I do not know what good NATO is if they are not doing things like causing stability in the Central Asian war, which means that they are not able to answer, they are not able to solve many of these arguments with the dissent. Any risk of the other advantage means that you should vote affirmative. Now, the peace process advantage, you have missed the vote on this argument. Israel is going to strike Iran by the end of the year. This is short-term and pre your review arguments. It crushes the entirety of NATO. Let's have a gut check moment. If the United States and Israel struck Iran by the end of the year, it would jack with NATO. We read a specific piece of evidence in the 1AR on this question that this would be how we perceive that it would hurt NATO cohesion. Do you think people in NATO would honestly not be a little TO'd if we nuclear struck or conventionally struck Iran by the end of the year with Israel? Your argument about the United States not being perceived as wrong, here's evidence. This is Kuhan. And of course, in 2009, Israel striking against Iran nuclear facilities, the United States would certainly be perceived as being part of the conspiracy, having assisted whether or not it did, which proves that they would be perceived, and the United States would reluctantly be part of the attack. This is walled in 1020. The United States would find it difficult to join an Israeli airstrike. I don't think that Israel could do it alone. Should our great ally decide to take a military strike, pressure will mount for us to stand by Israel. This is justified by me too in our arguments about why the Israel strike would not be credited to the United States. They could ask questions about whether or not the nuclear strike would include the United States or whether or not it would include the U.S. and Israel. Even if we did not win these arguments, it would obviously jack with NATO. Even if you do not think these arguments are necessarily true, it is intuitive that if Israel struck Iran in the short term, that the United States would obviously be tied up in negotiations about it. It would be seen as a change in U.S. first use policy. It would be seen as a change in U.S. doctrine, and would obviously affect our ability to generate cohesion within NATO, which is all answered on the other flow. Even if Israel acted alone, there would obviously be a debate in NATO about whether or not that had been a good idea, and the U.S. would be tied up in that advantage. Now, the NATO advantage, and now the NATO dissent. At the top, your Russia-China war argument is bad, and isn't about cohesion, it's about the existence of the alliance, which means that this is all inevitable, not unique. There's not any terminal uniqueness to this argument. Your argument about the LTC is that also no uniqueness to this argument. That change will not be successful in the status quo. Now, look, the probability of the status should be nearly zero because I have read through every piece of evidence that they have said, and there is zero piece of evidence that the review will be successful in the status quo. We will not move progressively. There is not enough cohesion in the status quo in order to get these changes within the NATO doctrine already, which means that they do not have uniqueness for any of their dissents. The United States nuclear first use policy upsetting that balance has no ramifications because they are not going to be successful in the status quo, which means that even if you win the magnitude of your link evidence, it does not deny that the uniqueness is already screwed in the status quo. Maybe you have read evidence that the collapse is inevitable in the status quo. Your evidence about there being structural factors are largely irrelevant. We have read multiple pieces of 1AR evidence that cohesion is already low in NATO, that there are structural things like internal bickering over Afghanistan and military preparedness, and the expansionism was an F argument that has slowed down the process within NATO. It also proves that reform isn't going to be successful in the status quo, which proves that there's no uniqueness for you to say. You have no arguments about why you have no arguments to the cohesion argument that we have read in the 1AR. Your argument about cohesion and expansion being good are largely wrong and not very intuitive. I do not understand why letting more people in NATO would allow for a structural debate. What? Also, our Perkovich evidence, also there's no risk that they turn the Russia advantage, because even if they lead to a strong NATO, it doesn't turn the Russia advantage, because our Perkovich evidence says that aggressive policy towards Russia is uniquely bad. Your arguments about how the United States is going to pull out of the NATO doctrine is largely spun and not substantiated by many pieces of your evidence. The United States would not have to withdraw from NATO to issue an NFU to Russia. That is not an argument that they are going to be able to win full risk of their dissent for. Yes, they will win a big link to their dissent, a big link, but they will not win very much uniqueness to. Your arguments about European expansionism and cohesion are all bad, because they are already having debates in the status quo over things like Afghanistan. Your Yost evidence is comparative, but we also have comparative evidence that there's already things undermined the alliance now.